have spent, a fair amount of time prompting, learning context engineering, thinking about prompt engineering in various ways at Section in my personal life and for other clients as well. And thanks, Ed, for the wonderful insights. We're going to start kind of small today, and think about building LLM automations specifically through the lens of a custom GPT, which we're going to get into and actually demo and build together at the end of our session today. But I think it's really fair to start this discussion, um, that everybody's talking about agents, right? Everybody wants to build agents, everybody wants to deploy agents that can act autonomously, use tools, understand context of the business in order to get some productivity gain or some ROI for maybe one of those business processes that Ed, was referencing for insurance claims, right? And I think kind of what everybody is missing is like, you don't need to just jump and go and build agents, right? Agents are very complex. There's a lot of unknowns in the agents, how they're going to interact with your tools, how they're going to interact with the user, how they're going to interact with their environment, right? The digital environment that they live in. And we shouldn't just jump straight to building agents. That's like jumping to, learning the hardest musical instrument without understanding musical theory. And it just doesn't make much sense to start at that point. It makes much more sense to become a builder first, right? And there's lots of ways to become a builder. I'm going to talk to you about a very tactical one today that you can walk away with if you have any of the off-the-shelf tools that are out there, Copilot, Claude, any of the large language models that you're probably paying 20 bucks a month for, or even if you're using them for free, you can start to become a builder and dip your toe in what it means to be a builder. And we're going to we're going to look at this through the lens of prompting specifically. But there is a curve to mastering AI, right? Everybody went through this, and maybe some of you are still going through it, and there is hope, right? You use a large language model for the first time. You're the curious noob. That was me when ChatGPT first came out. I thought it was the most amazing thing ever. I had it talking like a pirate, like everybody did. But quickly, I was like, okay, how am I actually going to use this, right? The tool at the time was not super capable. It could barely keep coherent thoughts over the chat. But as it started to grow, right, as we started to train new models, as we started to bring in more data, we started to think about how do we have the basics of prompting that get us what we want? Can we add the basic role, the goal, some context about what we need in order to think about how we can steer the large language model through the lens of our personal life, our business, or whatever task we're taking on. Um, Very quickly, we started to be able to use agents, and we'll talk about some of the agents that you've probably used and did not know that they were agents. Then we moved into bring your own data, right? Connecting it to your Gmail, connecting it to Microsoft. And then we started to be able to build these LLM automations that we're going to talk about today and really move into the top of this curve, which is agentic workflows and building agents. You'll notice here that there's kind of a big gap between using LLM automations, building them and using agentic workflows and actually building agents, right? So the agent is not the hammer and everything, is the nail. They need to be used strategically. In order to do that, I think the best way is to start building some of these automations so you can understand how the model works, right? Not just chat with a model once and then leave and get your output, but how does the system interact? How can I write prompts that are useful and durable, right, that an agent can act on? And so when we think about generative AI, right, we're kind of scoping it down on this slide, but it's a big web of a lot of similar terms, right? You've got agentic AI, which usually has some reasoning and planning built into it. It can decompose the goal that the user's looking at. It can usually think step by step, and it usually adapts its response to whatever goal or task that we're giving it here. And sort of a subset of this are actual agents, right? Something that can use tools, has some memory, probably works in a loop to get towards a goal. It can autonomously work towards that goal, and it can interact with you and the sort of digital environment. Now, these are very useful. They're very hard to build, but they're easy to use if you pick one that's sort of off the shelf for the most part. You of course have non-agentic things like just a single response. So I go into ChatGPT, I open it up, I ask for some information or for it to do something. Sometimes it won't plan, it won't use the reasoning model, and it just passively generates content. There is a ton of value in that, and I get a lot of value out of that every single day that I use ChatGPT or Claude. But these other tools, the agentic AI and the actual agents, are also incredibly useful if you know when to use them and what the right type of task is for those. So this is sort of my broad statement, my fiery statement, and this is pretty not crazy, right? All agents must be agentic, right? They need to have some sort of agentic capabilities, the ability to think through a process, the ability to decompose a goal. But not all agentic systems are agents, right? The real difference is the agent can act autonomously in the real slash digital world here, right? It's got access to tools. It can loop through and use those tools. It can gather context. It can make decisions, right, towards a goal. Now, when I say autonomously, there isn't some autonomous agent, always working in the background to help me with my day-to-day job. I still need to interact with it and kick off a task. But once I do that, that task can run for 5, 10, 30, 40 minutes, or even more as I kind of think about what the agent can do and the long time horizon that they're acting on. So all of these things are valuable. We just have to know when to use them if we're actually going to build them and when to use them as actual builders. And you've probably used a lot of these before. I guarantee you've used an agent at some point. When we think about these non-agentic type of generative AI models, think about DALL-E or Nano Banana, right? Everybody's used Nano Banana or at least heard of it. These are image generation models. There's nothing agentic about it. You put in your query to, take a picture of Ed and put him in some crazy background. That's not using an agent, right? It's using diffusion in order to get that. It's one prompt and one response. Every time you interact with ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini, you open up a new chat, you're just dealing with a non-agentic model if it's a query and response and there's no deep thinking. Where you get into more agentic capabilities inside of these models is when you're using a thinking model. So GPT-5 thinking, GPT-5 Pro, Claude with extended thinking, these have more agentic capabilities. They can think through the steps. You can see their reasoning before it outputs a response. And you've probably used an agent if you've used something like deep research in ChatGPT or research in Claude or even in Gemini. These are agents, right? It first takes your query, what you want to do. It gives you maybe a plan or a goal. Maybe it tries to refine that, and then it goes out into the web or over the corpus of information that you've given it, and it looks through that information to do deep research, and it's making decisions along the way, right? Of what to look for, what the response was from a web search, and then acting on that and changing its course. Of course, all the coding tools that we see today, Devin, Claude Code, Codex, right? These are all agents, right? And they have agentic capabilities, but they act autonomously towards a given goal and use tools and context in order to do that. So as we've been talking about, there's been this evolution of interactions, right? Everybody started off by query and response, right? We were the users, and we still are the users in some cases. I go to my favorite chatbot and I ask it for a question or an answer or a goal. Now we've started to move into, okay, I can start to build with these large language models and interact with them in a different way, right? I can actually build a system prompt or instructions that inform my custom GPT, or I can give instructions to my Claude project or my ChatGPT project in order to shape its response when I interact with it. And where we're going with this, right, is you becoming not only the user and the builder, but ultimately the strategist, right? When we have a system that can work with agents, right, things that work independently towards an objective, you become the strategist. You're informing its context, what it's going to do, right? And so you chain all these things together and work up to kind of being that strategist. But I think starting at the builder is really important after you become a user, right? So here's the reality check. There's a bunch of these tools out here that will actually help you automate workflows using large language models, right? There's Zapier, there's N8N, there's Relay, there's Make, there's even custom GPTs, which are super approachable. But you can think about where do I go to get my automation from, right? I don't immediately jump to an agent, right? I need to think about one of these tools. A lot of the use cases that we see, a lot of those business processes, like the insurance claim that Ed was talking about earlier, there are a lot of just simple automations that might be chained together to get to a goal, right? And so we have a massive skill gap. Right, between us being the user and the builder to actually building the actual agent, that requires a developer in a lot of cases, or at least some really good knowledge about how the prompts work, deep knowledge of how the large language model works, and kind of putting that all together. And so a lot of the infrastructure is not ready. It's very new, right, to build these agents. And so this is why we should really start small here. And I think custom GPTs are the way to do that, right? So when you're building one of these automations, you're using language in order to inform what our custom GPT or your Claude project or whatever automation you're building is trying to do, right? So we're building a system prompt, just like we would build a system prompt when we're talking to somebody about how to execute a task at work or in our home life or in our personal life. We're kind of becoming the prompt engineer or the context engineer, as you want to think about it. And this scales sort of infinitely, right? You need good prompting skills to be a user. You need good prompting skills to be a builder. And if you want to build or interact or use or inform how an agent is being built, then you're going to need to be able to prompt as well. So, kind of moving up that curve is going to be super important. So, this is kind of what it looks like. I can prompt well, right? Everybody can prompt well. Usually, generally speaking, we have some concept of how to prompt well and what's important. In 2023, that was it, right? We were all figuring out how to prompt. In 2024, we were thinking, okay, I can now create clear instructions that are super repeatable and I can get pretty good consistency inside of my chat. And now we're moving into this sort of exponential transformation, right? I can orchestrate, I can write multiple prompts, I can give context to my agent, and that's kind of where we're going. But we have to start with being able to write those clear instructions that are repeatable. So if you think, oh no, I can't do that, right? I'm going to show you a tactical way to do that today so you can get into this kind of playground and start seeing how are my prompt building skills? How can I inform what my large language model is doing? How can I give it the right tools and context, right, to build an agentic system that will eventually help me understand how I can use and build agents in the future when I need them, right? So our typical prompts look like use the data that I just uploaded and show me a rolling 30-day average of the closing price, of this particular stock. Prompting 201 looks like, hey, you're an advanced data analysis. I'm going to give you a CSV. I'm going to give you some constraints. I'm going to get you a spec for the output. I'm going to give you examples about what I want this output to look like. I'm going to put some guardrails in there, right? I don't know what's going to happen in my prompting 101 example. I have an expectation of what I want, but in prompting 201, right, this next level, I've put all of these constraints and boundaries and guardrails. So I'm not guaranteeing that I'm going to get the exact output that I'm looking for, but I'm doing my darndest to inform the large language model about how I think about the world, right? How do I think about it through my business process? How do I think about it through whatever ROI I'm trying to get? Is that measurable? Is it valuable, right? And is it doable? This is sort of my testing ground to do that. A lot of what I do in my day to day is going into one of these custom GPTs, going into Bolt, which you're going to see Ed and I do live as we talk about vibe coding later today, and understanding, is this doable? Is it even valuable? Should our team at Section invest time into building this to see measurable ROI, right? So this is the mindset that you have to have. It is not perfect. I've built thousands of custom GPTs, probably 1,000 at this point. More than half of them haven't worked, right? That's partially because the capabilities weren't there. Maybe early on I didn't know how to do it. There was no great framework. And sometimes it just doesn't work with the tool that I have. And that's okay. We have to be able to wade through that in order to understand the capabilities and push this further as we're moving from that user to the builder. So let's talk about the LLM automation. We're here today. That was a little bit of theory, but I hope it was very useful for you to understand and kind of set the context for a lot of what we're going to be talking about in just a minute and in this session that we're going into, Ed and I are going into today. So what it breaks down to is an LLM automation is teaching the large language model to become your specialist without coding, right? I am not a developer. I've always been a builder, and there's a huge gap between my vision and getting that vision out into the world, right? And now I have this incredible thing called a large language model that can help me get that vision out into the world and become my specialist along the way. And I don't have to have any technical knowledge. I only have technical knowledge because of the fire, because of working with developers, not because I'm a computer engineer or a programmer, right? And so what we're going to do is we're going to give our custom GPT today is what we're going to build. This is going to be our automation. We're going to give it instructions and knowledge and tools, right? This is going to build our sort of language automation. And there's a bunch of players and there's a bunch of ways you can put this into action following our session today. You've got custom GPTs, which are my favorite. So if you have ChatGPT, that's what you're going to want to use. You've got Copilot agents, you've got Gemini gems, you've got projects in Claude, you've got Glean agents as well. You've got the same kind of capabilities that Claude has in OpenAI now. You can't go wrong. Pick what you have and use it and figure it out. I know that sounds hard, but you've got to start with step one, pick your tool, and then figure out, have some time to play, build in that time, and you're going to learn a lot. You're going to be the builder, and you're going to be incredibly valuable when it gets to building agents and finding ROI inside of your workflows. So the blueprint is stupid simple. There's four components. I need to give it some instructions that imbue my knowledge and my world thinking into the model. The model knows a lot about a lot of things, but I want to narrow it down into my business process as an example. You might give it a knowledge base. That knowledge base might be the internet, the open internet. It might be data that you have that's personal to you or from your company. And so these are the documents that are going to be context for the LLM. I don't want to have to explain all of our process. I can show my process and give it access to all of these things in order to do that. And I do that through knowledge. I'm going to give it a set of tools. So I'm going to give it the ability to execute and run code, maybe generate images. Maybe I want to pursue an integration if I'm building a Copilot agent. Maybe I want to give it web search, which is pretty standard in all these. And then I want to think about, how is the conversation going to be designed? We're calling this an automation. It is an automation, but it's not just like a rote click and everything happens, right? It's not deterministic code. We're using our language to inform this automation. And so I have to think about, if I'm going to give this to a user, how are they going to use it? What are they going to need to provide? What constraints am I going to need to think about as I'm building this so the user has a really awesome experience with it and can get the same sort of consistency and output that I can when I built it and used it? All right. So all these platforms, 80% of the features are basically the same. We're at feature parity for most of them. So pick one, like I said, and go for it. 20% of those features are going to be different, and you might need something specific if you're in a Copilot or Microsoft shop, or if you're in a Gemini shop. But here's the deal. $20 a month gets you started. I don't get paid by any of these companies. I personally like ChatGPT and I like Claude, but you can't go wrong with any of them at this point if you're just getting started. Your team plans are going to start at $25 to $30 a month. Your enterprise plans are going to be much more expensive, but you're going to get a lot of ROI out of using these sort of automation platforms in there. So start with what you have. You can always migrate. The knowledge is going to migrate as well with you. So let's talk about really quickly, when does it make sense to build one of these automations using a large language model? I think these are four really good reasons that you're going to want to build one of these automations. If you're doing something frequently, you want to avoid giving the AI the same instructions every time you go to complete a task. This can be weekly, it can be daily, it can be monthly, it can be quarterly. You pick the time frame, but the frequency has to be there. In the second case, you might want to scale some efficiencies to your team, right? So you want to share some of these productivity gains on a particular task with your team. You're going to see how we can do that today in the example that we're going to build. You need some specialized responses, right? You need some tailored knowledge of a particular domain, and you want to imbue that in your custom GPT, in your LLM automation. It's a really great use case for that. And on the fourth one, you need some sort of consistency and quality control in the outputs. Consistency and quality control is not guaranteed, but it's better than if you just went into ChatGPT, wrote your crappy prompt, and then you left and expected a really good answer. So at the end of the day, this is all about getting a better, faster output compared to just opening up ChatGPT, opening up Claude, and having a one-on-one conversation where you're doing this back and forth, right? So we're going to get a better, faster output with this. It's very simple, this framework. We want to first define our task, right? What is the specific task that we're looking to automate or augment, right? So Think about the processes. It's really good to write them down. If you can write down what the process is, then I guarantee you can translate that into something that the large language model can understand and follow. Now, you're not going to automate 1,000 step process or 100 step process. Start with something that's maybe 5 to 10 steps, right? These models and these tools that we're talking about today do have some limit, right? You don't expect that you're just going to automate your job away completely with this and sit back and go on vacation, right? You pick your 5 to 10 steps that you think are the most important, the most arduous, and start there and always build up. So next, you're going to want to think about what context does my automation need in this case in order to get to my goal or my output. Think about what kind of documents you're going to provide. Then you're going to start to write the instructions, which are going to be clear, specific, and usually constraint based because we're taking a process that a human does and we're trying to replicate that with a large language model, right? Then we're going to add some tools in, web search, code, integration, all those things that we might need. You can turn these on and off. It's simple to play around with them. So just pick something and get started and see what happens. And eventually we're going to get to testing and refining this, which is the hardest part, right? Judging the output. How close is this output to the output that I'm expecting? What are the edge cases? How do I go back in? This is a living, breathing thing, right? That I need to take care of. I'm assuming care of it when I build it. I don't want thing to be static because it's going to have new capabilities, or new capabilities are going to come from the model providers that I want to give it. Okay, so like I said, these are the 4 things. You don't have to pick one of these 4 things. You can pick multiple of these. There's probably 10 things, honestly, that it's good for, but these 4 are a really good start. So I'm going to leave this up for a second, but analyzing some data really frequently, creating documentation for a project, standardizing a response template, using your brand voice in marketing, technical support chatbot for your internal team. These are all really great examples of how you can start to define your task. Then you want to gather your context, like I was talking about. Pull in any company documents, policies, procedures, historical data, past projects, case studies, best practices, any reference material, right? That's going to be super important to get your expertise into the large language model. And what you're going to think about here is what kind of types of knowledge do I have, right? I might have spreadsheets, I might have APIs, which are a little bit more advanced. I've probably got PDFs and Word documents, Markdown files, internal SharePoint sites. Maybe I've got support tickets. These can all be super rich context for your automation in order to get to your output. One of the final steps to actually getting starting here is writing your instructions, right? There's 4 layers that I love: the objective, the context, the task, and the rules, right? This is where I always start when I'm writing my automations or any system prompt, even for an agent. This is what I start with, right? I'd always think, don't overthink my initial prompt. This is going to be an iterative process. You're not going to write the most perfect words on the page, and sometimes you don't even have to, right? These models are really capable. And so it's all about getting the right words in the right place and not overdoing it. You can always add more to these instructions because remember, we're not writing code, we're writing language, right? We're using language to convey what we want from the model. So you can see here, this is an example that I build in one of my courses, very clearly defines what the custom GPT in this case is taking into account, the context, the steps, and the rules that it needs to take into account in order to get to my goal. Okay, there's a lot of capabilities and tools. I actually want to just build this really quickly, Maxwell. I know I'm going over time here, but I just want to show this. And we're going to put it all together into a live demo here inside of ChatGPT. I'm going to actually build this really quickly. I've already got my instructions written here. So we're going to grab this. This is a simple data analysis tool for some fake sales data that I make up. You can open this up. You don't even have to give this thing a name. You just need to put your instructions in here to get started and actually just select the tools that you want. In this case, I've got a CSV of data. I'm going to open up Code Interpreter as my tool here. I'll just name it test for now. And I can actually just go in here. I'm going to drag and drop my CSV of sales data. And I'm going to say, help me. I just need some help. And it already has a lot of the context about what I need. First step is understand what data is in here. Tell the user what data you have access to. Then suggest some ways that you can actually analyze the data for the user, this sales data. And then third, do the analysis and then ask for any follow-up questions. So you can see it's writing code to understand. What information did the user just upload? Okay, I've got the account name, the sales stage, the healthcare type, and the contract value. Here's some ideas for you. Here's 5 ideas. All I got to do is click bang. Number one, it knows I want to do a pipeline breakdown by stage of this analysis, and it's going to go and execute that. And it's going to give me all my data back. It probably asked if I want a visualization, and I can say, sure, why not, right? I can download this data, and look, it already generated this for me. I didn't even have to ask it to do this. I can go into my instructions, I can inform it to do this, I can tell it what not to do here. This is where you get into testing and refining. I wrote this in probably 5 or 10 minutes, a couple hours before the call today, and tested this, right? Just don't overthink too much. Just start by building and see what you can do. It's going to be a magical moment when you get here, and it's going to, I think there's going to be a lot of gains for you once you get this skill down. It's very important, and it's going to be applicable as AI goes forward, capabilities increase, and we see all sorts of new features come out of these models. This is sort of the tactical way to start creating this. If I have a second, I'm going to show you in 3 different tools to show you how portable this is. But if you're in ChatGPT, on the left-hand side, you're going to see the GPTs. If you're a paid, unpaid might have the ability to see it. So you're going to need to look out for that. If you click Explore here, it's going to take you to the custom GPT store. If you're in an enterprise instance, this is going to look like your company storefront plus the public storefront. So I would encourage people to go in here and play around with some of these custom GPTs and see what people are building. Let's hide this over here. And to actually build the custom GPT, you're just going to click Create in the upper right-hand corner. And that'll take you to where I was earlier, where you saw me pasting in those instructions and actually running this. So there's 2 ways to create this. You can skip directly to configure, or you can chat with the custom GPT builder. I prefer to go here, but if you want to use the create, it's a totally viable option, very easy to do. Um, and I'll just paste my prompt in here, and we'll let it run once we do that. So I've got all my tools here. I've got my conversation starters, so I can put in here, help me build a sales pipeline update. Right. So this is that conversation starter, similar to what Eric was showing. You can just click this, it'll start the conversation. I can upload any knowledge here as well. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to put the onus on the user to upload their sales information. I can select which model I want here, right? This is basically a glorified form to build your custom GPT. OpenAI has lots of great resources on what all these things do. You saw this run, you saw the sort of 3 steps that it goes to. But really quickly, I just want to show you, you can do this in Gemini as well, right? So if I click gems here and I click explore gems, we'll hide this sidebar. I can create one of these gems. Eric was talking about this as well, since they have an enterprise Gemini account. And you're seeing this same form basically, right? I've got a name, a description, and I can paste my example or my instructions in here. I can add my knowledge if I want to, and I can actually preview this. So we have to give this a name. So we'll give it a name first. Everything will load up, and I can just actually attach. So I'll pull in here this same file from earlier and say build my queue to results here. And I can test and preview this. So you can see it looks the exact same thing basically as ChatGPT here. It's going to explore the data columns because that's what I told it to do. I can see the thinking behind it, and it's going to give me a response that looks very similar to ChatGPT. And I'm going to do, my breakdown here as the suggested type of analysis by type. And it's actually going to go through and do that data analysis as well. So it's going to plan the analysis, and it's going to give me that very similar output. It's not going to be the exact same output. It's a different model, different tool set, but you can, rest assured it's going to be pretty close to your instructions. Again, we've got that nice chart. We saw a similar chart in ChatGPT. Same thing here. It's given me some more charts, right? I can actually start to refine this based on what I want. I can go in and edit my instructions, work out anything I don't want it to do, maybe give it some more capabilities. And just to show everybody just quickly, I can do the same thing with a project in Claude. So I'll just do sales help. In this case, I can create my project here. I can give those same instructions in here as well. So just paste these same instructions, the same format, save the instructions. I'll take that same exact file and say, build me an analysis. And I'm being just very quick here. about what I want, shows you the power of it. You should obviously take more time and be more intentional about your prompting, even with this first prompt. And so it's going to do the exact same thing. It's going to read the file to understand it. I can see the file here. This is all of my data that's in there, all this fake data that I've come up with. It's going to go through its thinking process. It's going to catalog what it has. So it's going to tell me those same columns are available. Again, the response looks very similar. And now it's giving me those same options. I'm going to hit one, same or similar options. I'm going to hit one. It's going to do that analysis. It's going to call the code interpretation tools that it has to execute the code. I'm going to get that very similar output. And that's all driven by my instructions, that context that I've given it, and the actual file that I've given it. And so that really shows the power of the prompt and the context that you're giving it. Very portable. Doesn't matter really what tool you have. You can do this in Copilot as well. It looks very similar. So we're at parity there, like I mentioned. And now this is where the power comes in. Iterating on that prompt, refining it, working out what you don't want, what you do want, figuring out what goes wrong, how many steps do I have, all those beautiful things that come in the test and refine part of this. Okay, we'll give this just one more second, right? I've given it the extended thinking. You can see all the code that it's writing in order to do that, right? I might not understand the code. That's okay. If I do understand the code, that's for me to look into what's exactly happening here. And you can see it's giving me some of those same statistics. I've done this a bajillion times with this data set. This looks all right to me. It didn't generate any of the visualizations, but I can ask it to do that as well and follow up and start to continue my conversation here. And the next time I do this, I come right back here in my project. I do this over again. I open up a new chat in my gym over here. I engage with this GPT that I've built again, and I can get that pretty close consistency with my process each and every time.